Hi, good morning, everyone. Welcome to ST120. This is our Unit 1 discussion. All right, let's get started. It's still morning here on the East Coast. It's probably very early for some of y'all on the West Coast. If you hear some thunder in the background, we just started randomly storming, so I wasn't expecting that. So a little bit about me, if you haven't had me yet as an instructor, my name is Megan Ludwig. I have been teaching Surg Tech for about 10 years, and I graduated in 2008 with my Surg Tech certificate from a local community college. And then over the years, I've also got my associates and then my bachelor's. So I like to learn. That's one of the things that I think is important in this type of field as well. You got to have a love for learning because things constantly change in this field. So this is me with my two little kiddos, my goobers. They keep me on my toes. I really enjoy spending time with them. They're actually a little bit older now than this picture. It's been a couple years, but my daughter is actually now 10 and my son is 9. All right, so today we're going to talk about just the intro into sterile processing. I'll give you a chance for questions, etc. at the end. So our objectives for this particular unit, and really some of these apply to every unit. You're going to hear this one a lot. We're going to apply principles of asepsis and sterile technique throughout. So we'll kind of always relate back to that one. Your PPE was your discussion for the week. So since this is now Friday, you should have already done that one. All right, we're going to talk about different equipment that is going to be used, different supplies for sterilization. We're going to talk a lot about industry standards just throughout every week. So here are your assignments for this week. You still have time to get these in, okay? So if you think you've missed a deadline, it's okay. Go ahead and turn it in. All right, I'd rather you get the points than nothing at all. So your discussions for every week are due on Wednesday, your initial discussion, and then you have to respond to 2 of your peers by Sunday. So make sure you don't get behind on those because every week there are 40 points and those tend to add up, right? So don't miss out on those points, right? So let's get in with our intro basically into sterile processing. So a lot of times we'll call it sterile processing. Sometimes you'll hear it called central processing or surgical supply or something along those lines. There's a lot of different terms for this particular department, but they all mean the same thing and pretty much. So central services is typically, like it says, in a central location, because sometimes we refer to sterile processing as like the heart of the hospital, because without this department, the rest of the hospital wouldn't have their supplies, right? They wouldn't be able to do what they do because this department is just vital. You have to have clean, sterile supplies for patient care, right? So it's very important that it's central and it's easily accessed to the rest of the hospital. They also are in charge of the most effective equipment for processing and sterilization. They have to keep up with those things, staying up to date with industry standards, like I said, and making sure you have the right equipment for the job. You're also going to be responsible for continuing your education. Like I said, I enjoy learning because healthcare changes. Through studies, etc., we find, maybe this works better. So we have to keep up with that so we can provide the best patient care. Same concept here. We might find a certain sterilizer works better for something else, or maybe a different parameter, different temperature or something. So those things might change over time. So what does a sterile processing tech do? You probably have a little bit of an idea at this point, since some of you are choosing this as your career, okay? But there are other things that you may not necessarily think about. This one is probably the most common here under basic responsibilities. You have to understand microbial transmission. You have to understand how germs and bacteria stay on those instruments and could potentially cause infections to patients, right? That's an important skill. Not only that, but you have to have good communication because it's not just you working in this particular, yeah, I guess it could be if you're in a very small place, but there's still communication involved. You have to work as a team and communicate not with just, the person standing next to you, but you might be responsible for communicating with um, the emergency department, or maybe the head of the operating room, or someone within that operating room as they're working. They may call you and be like, hey, I need such and such piece of equipment. Can you help me out? Or can you find it and send it to me? There's a lot of different interdepartmental communication as well as like external department communication. Ethics are huge. Ethics are basically your values, right? Um, we have to respect patient rights or their own values. We can't impose what we think they should do on them, right? They have the right to their choosing their own patient care and how they want to proceed with certain things. So, ethics is also important when we're talking about um, having a good, we call it a surgical conscience, making sure that you're doing the right thing when nobody's looking. So that all relates back to ethics. All right, let's talk a little bit about the department itself. How is it laid out? All right, every department, central services department, has to be laid out carefully because of the flow of clean and dirty, I guess you could say. You're going to hear us say this a lot. You have to keep clean and dirty separate because you can't cross contaminate. You can't like pull a dirty trash bag through your entire clean area. You're going to contaminate everything and spread it even further. So the dirty stuff stays on the dirty side, the soiled area. In between the two is a clean processing area. In a lot of facilities, it's actually like a washer decontaminator machine that you're like putting the the trays that you may have just like rinsed off and maybe decontaminated into that washer decontaminator, and it will literally pass through to the sterile side, clean side. That way, you're not crossing dirty directly over to the clean. One-way flow, you can't backtrack, okay? So this term decontamination just means removing contamination to make it safe for handling. So in this soiled area, you're going to have trays of instruments that maybe came from the OR or even the ER that are dirty with maybe large amounts of blood or tissue from the patient if they didn't get wiped off in the OR. That bioburden is potentially hazardous to you because it might contain viruses, maybe HIV, AIDS, who knows what's on that. You have to treat it all like it's contaminated, right? So you have to remove all of those things before you can reprocess it and re-sterilize it. So that's what this clean processing area is. All right, so the term sterilization, you're going to hear a lot. And I noticed in some of your all's discussions, I was just reading through those actually not too long ago, a couple hours ago. Some of you are throwing this term sterilization around and kind of like applying it to things that aren't sterile. So be very careful with that. Sorry, that was my dog. Um, be careful with this term sterilization. It's a very specific term because it means the process of removing all living microorganisms, including spores. So, you in your scrubs that are freshly laundered from the hospital are not sterile. Okay, you can't sterilize your skin, living tissue, um, and things that are coming in contact with your own skin are not sterile like that in that sense. Now, like these trays here in this picture, if it's gone through the sterilization process and the biological indicator shows that it didn't grow any bacteria, that can be considered sterile. It met those conditions for sterility. Now, things that may, like a blood pressure cuff or even your like regular gloves that aren't sterile are still considered like clean or even surgically clean, but they're not sterile. So be very careful with this term. Okay. To make sure something is sterile in that machine, you have to make sure certain parameters are met, and those can be found in your instructions for use, IFUs. So we're going to talk a lot about IFUs and always referencing back to that because there are a lot of things in this department that have very, very specific standards that have to be met. And sometimes it is difficult to remember all those things, but they're vital. So you might have to go back and reference those IFUs. Usually it's a lot of departments have it in like a binder or something very easily accessed. So along with the central sterile department, you're also going to have a sterile storage area and a distribution center because remember, it's the heart of the hospital. So most of the sterile storage areas for the hospital are basically attached to that department. If we are using the sterile storage to go to the OR, most are going to use some sort of cart system, or it's called a case cart. That's what this picture is here at the bottom. That's called a case cart system. Typically, they have doors that close. Some are completely open on both sides, but it's a way to pull everything that you need for your operating room or that particular case for that surgeon by using something called a pick sheet or a preference card. It is specific to that surgeon doing that particular case because surgeons have set ways that they like to do things. And you might have the same case when, let's say, you're doing a craniotomy. We're going to cut into the head. Let's say you have a craniotomy. You might have two different neurosurgeons, and their preference cards for that one case might be completely different. The surgeon might like this particular tray of instruments, while this one needs something different. So you're always going to be checking those, pulling it, whatever's listed on that preference card, and putting it into something like this case cart and sending it to the OR that way. Sometimes it's very full. Sometimes it's even stacked up on the top. Depends on the case. So when we're talking about the processing cycle, overall, like how do things get from point A to point B, essentially, is really you could start here at this clean part. You're going to clean the instruments, going through that washer decontaminator. And after that, it's safe to handle with your bare hands. So then you're going to be inspecting all of the instruments that have to go back in that tray that are going to be reprocessed. So it's part of your job to inspect every single instrument to make sure it's safe for use and that it is usable. If you send up things that aren't usable to the doctor, they're going to be very mad for one, and it's not going to be effective and good for the patient. So then you're going to, after inspecting, reassemble or assemble the instruments into a tray, which gets packaged a specific way, whether a tray or a peel pack. We're going to practice that in a later week. Once it's packaged correctly, it can then go into whatever the proper sterilizing machine would be. A lot of times it's the steam sterilizer. That's probably the most common, but depending on maybe it's, too delicate or something, it might have to go in a different sterilizer or heat sensitive. Once it's sterilized, it needs to be stored properly. And then once someone decides that's what they need, they're ready to use, it can then be dispensed. And then really between these two is when it's being used, between dispense and clean. So once that's been used, it needs to start the process over. That's the whole processing cycle. So I said we'd talk about ethics there at the beginning. Ethics and safety are vital, I think, to anybody working in healthcare in the hospital. Really, it should probably be anybody with a job, but for this instance, we'll talk about the hospital because patients' lives are at risk. You may not have direct patient contact, but your job in sterile processing is vital because you might accidentally give, a patient who already has a weakened immune system another disease to fight off if you're not careful. We don't want to do that. We don't want to make it harder for these patients. So ethics really means doing the right thing when no one is looking. Like we're talking about that in the OR, that's surgical conscience. Having a good conscience to stick up for that patient. You're that patient's advocate, doing the right thing, even though no one may have seen you mess up, right? You still have to correct that. You want to have respect for your coworkers and your patients. That will lead you to do the right thing. And you're also going to practice something called standard precautions. Standard precautions means And like I said before, you're going to treat every contaminated instrument like it has an infectious disease, like it has AIDS on it, or HIV, or TB, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. You always treat everything and all patients like they have a disease. That's going to protect you and it's going to protect the patient. So that involves using proper PPE. So I wanted to give you this quick little video. Some of you may not have actually stepped foot in an OR or maybe in the sterile processing department, and you don't really know what it looks like. Maybe you've researched it and you have, but I thought this was a nice little short video, just a brief overview of what the sterile processing department looks like.
One of the most important areas of Mary Greeley Medical Center is right here. We're in the sterile processing department, and it's where all the surgical instrumentation gets cleaned and sterilized for any upcoming surgeries. And not many people get to see this area, but I'm going to give you an inside look into the sterilization process. Each day, we see hundreds of different types of instruments that require hundreds of different ways to clean them, and each sterile processing tech must learn these to ensure that the instruments used are safe for the next patient. Instrument reprocessing begins in the decontamination room. This process begins by soaking and manually cleaning each instrument in a sink filled with a water and detergent mixture. This helps break down and remove the blood and other materials that can be left from surgery. We call this material bioburden. We use a variety of different types of brushes, syringes, and automated irrigators to remove the remaining bioburden from the instruments. After all the bioburden has been removed from the instruments, we rinse them and move them to the next step in the process, ultrasonic cleaning. With ultrasonic cleaning, we are removing the remaining biofilm that cannot be seen. Ultrasonic cleaning works by creating ultrasonic waves that travel through the water. These waves create tiny unstable bubbles, and when these bubbles come in contact with the instrument, they implode and remove the remaining biofilm. After all the biofilm has been removed, the instruments are rinsed and prepared for the final step of the decontamination process, mechanical cleaning. Mechanical cleaning is done in a washer disinfector similar to a high-powered dishwasher. This step removes anything that might be left on the instruments. The washer rack has spray arms that spin and clean the instruments using detergents and high-pressured spraying water. Each cycle provides a thermal disinfection so the instruments are safe to handle. When the cycle is complete, we can now inspect and assemble the instruments in preparation for sterilization. Assembly begins by inspecting each instrument to ensure that they are working appropriately. We then arrange these instruments into sets that will be used during specific types of surgical procedures. Each set has many types of instruments in common, as well as instruments that are unique to a specific surgical procedure. So each sterile processing tech is responsible for learning each instrument and how it works. This provides the surgical staff everything needed to provide excellent care for our patients. We then prepare the instrument set for sterilization by placing all the instruments in a mesh basket. The basket is then placed in a specialized container that is designed for sterilization. Some containers have a sealed hard outer casing, and some must be wrapped with a specialized material called blue wrap. Both types of containers are designed to allow the instruments to be sterilized in the container, and once sterilized, maintain the safety of the instruments while in storage. Sterilization is done by using different methods such as steam, vaporized hydrogen peroxide, and a variety of other methods, but the most common instruments that are used in a surgery are sterilized using steam. To make sure the sterilization process has been effective, we use chemical and biological indicators. Chemical indicators are placed on the outside of blue wrap or rigid container and allow us to know at a glance that the instruments have gone through the sterilization process. They are also placed inside the container with the instruments so the surgical staff knows the instruments were sterilized and safe for use on our patients. The biological indicators help us verify that our sterilization process is effective enough to kill all the germs that may be on our instruments. This process helps us know we can provide patients with the best possible care. Once the instrument set has been sterilized, they go into our sterile storage area until they are needed for the next surgical procedure. This area is also the staging area for the next day's surgical procedures as well as potential emergency surgeries. Once the instruments are ready, we assemble them on a case cart to be sent out for surgery. Be sure to check out mgmc.org for more information.
All right, so there you go. Hopefully that gave you a good overview of what most sterile processing departments look like. In my area, that looks very similar. So you're going to have the same type of work patterns and organization systems that are very similar in areas that you end up working in. So hopefully that was helpful to you. All right, so here's our conclusion. Just to sum up, remember, you guys are going to be an integral part of the hospital, even though you're not going to have direct patient care. So a lot of times, I think sometimes people get in this mindset that maybe those types of departments like sterile processing aren't as important because they never see patients, but that's definitely not true. Even in that video, the guy's like, this is the heart of the hospital because without sterile processing, nothing would get done. There would be no point because there would be nothing safe for the patients to have, sterile equipment, or uh, cases couldn't happen, right? Um, so keep that in mind. You guys are going to be very integral to the overall function of the hospital. We're going to talk a lot throughout this entire quarter about decontamination and how to prep and pack certain things. You saw a little bit of that in the video. We're always going to refer back to our instructions for use and what that term sterilization means. Remember, sterilization is the absence of all living microorganisms. So that's viruses, bacteria, prions, parasites, whatever it is, the absence of those on any surface, including spores. None of it exists on those surfaces. And we cannot sterilize living tissue like my skin or hair. But you can sterilize inanimate objects like instruments. We're going to apply knowledge of surgical procedures basically to every step of the job, like knowing what is important to pull for that particular case. Maybe something would seem off if you know that case, what that case is, if that instrument doesn't really work for that case, you're going to know. And it's important to work as a team because it's not just you. You're a big part of the hospital. You're going to work with a lot of different departments. Okay. So just to sum up, if you need to find the dates, if you like to see your dates in one space, you can click on your little calendar button here and it should tell you, it'll have a nice calendar for you if you like it in calendar view or something like that, as opposed to going through the syllabus, just to give you an idea, because there are in the next 8 weeks a lot of assignments and I don't want you to get behind. So maybe write them down, print them off, whatever you have to do just to keep up with those, okay? All right, so if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. My email is mludwig@herzing.edu. I do have office hours on Tuesdays from 1 to 3 Eastern Standard Time. I'm on the East Coast. So keep that in mind. If that doesn't work for you, reach out and we can try to set something else up, okay? But please reach out with any questions, or if you think you're not going to be able to submit an assignment, if you are in the hospital or something, let me know, okay? I'd rather know what's going on with you than give you a 0, okay? So have a great week. Bye.